guys, you're not going to be operating in Serbia. We similarly tried to get that country going. So we met all the local taxi companies and everybody was super hesitant and didn't want to join the platform. And we didn't really understand what's going on because we had already proven to so many companies that what we have is great. But in Serbia, nobody wanted to sign up. We actually then went to meet the biggest company in the city. They reportedly had thousands of cars and were supposed to be a big proper company. And it's one of the most bizarre experiences in my life. We show up there with our local salesperson. We go to this address that they had given us, and it's literally like middle of nowhere, some random residential apartment building. And then we walk in, and it's an old Soviet times apartment. And then there's some grandma in the kitchen who's cooking some food. There's some like guys sitting there who are obviously bodyguards, some like big, huge, muscular guys. And then we ask like, yeah, what's going on? Is this the right place? They're like, yeah, you know, the boss is sitting in the back. Then we go to the room and it's completely crazy. There's some huge guy who looks like Fidel Castro there, popping a cigar. There's a safe in the corner, like a huge one. And then there's a pistol on the table. And
pistol?
Yeah.
On the table.
And I'm like, wow, okay, this is some interesting meeting I walked into. But what do you do, right? I mean, if you're there, I was 20 years old. I was like, well, let's try to have the sales meeting, see what happens. And then we were telling him about how great our software is and the functionality and everything. And, you know, he was just puffing his cigar. He didn't care. And then at the end of the meeting, he just says, guys, you're not going to be operating in Serbia. And turns out he was like the local mafia leader. So all the taxi companies did what he said. And since that day, I've never been back to Serbia, and Bolt is still not today operating there, which I think is a great story that just shows how messed up this sector is. And it's been like that for decades. And then that's exactly what we were trying to change.
Warm welcome to Framgångspodden, Markus Villig.
Hey, great to be here.
Really nice to have you here. How is it to be in Sweden?
It's always a pleasure. I actually used to spend my childhood in Sweden over the summer because my aunt and my cousins are living here as well.
All right. Do you know a lot of Swedish or? Very
little, unfortunately. It's been about 20 years since that time.
Okay. I understand. And it would be, you're a guest that I had. I thought about you a long time, and I follow your experience and your like story with Bolt, and that's like one of a kind actually. So it's amazing. So I'm very glad that you're taking the time. But I also have heard some stuff that you're like build a company that worth around in Swedish kronor around 100 miljarder Swedish kronor. We said like 8 billion euros. That's a lot. But I heard that you still fly economy.
Yes. I think that it tells a lot about me, and it tells a lot about the structure of how we built Bolt from day one as well, which is that we're really customer obsessed. So every chance we get to save money, we try to do it, and we pass on those savings to the customers. And I think actually we've taken quite a lot of inspiration from many Swedish companies as well, whether that's H&M or IKEA or many others. I think there's a lot of sort of good principles that we've tried to learn from.
Wow. Amazing. I heard that one of your investors saw you at a Ryanair plane and was like, come on, Markus, are you flying Ryanair?
Yeah, but I think that it's something where I really believe that if the leadership of the company doesn't live by the values of the company, then nobody's going to follow it. So if I'm telling my staff that, hey, we got to be customer minded, we got to be very frugal and efficient, and if I don't follow it and I spend a lot of the company's money on flying somewhere in business class, then people don't take my word seriously.
Yeah, that's amazing. And like I also read that the most people in the top in Uber, they fly private jets everywhere. So that's amazing.
Yeah, completely different mentality.
Yeah, completely. And maybe that's one of your success.
Absolutely.
But can we start a little bit from the beginning? Because you're a so interesting person. Like, what's the start that you were selling Legos in the kindergarten?
Yeah, as long as I can remember, I've always been a big fan of entrepreneurship and science. And already when I was in kindergarten, I was finding ways how to make some money and buy more candies on the side. So I was buying Legos from other kids in the kindergarten and selling them to other kids with a markup. And I was going and buying some candies from the shop, and then next day trying to sell them in the kindergarten to make some extra money. And that was when I was 5 years old. So, I mean, I've always been sort of trying to find ways how to create value for people. And if I can make money that way, that's awesome.
What was the next step for you?
Well, actually, it was quite obvious to me that I always wanted to be an entrepreneur and run my own business. And I never imagined I'm going to be working for anybody, because I think I'm stubborn that way. I really want to make my own decisions. So next up, I was learning how to code. Because my older brother Martin joined Skype back in, I think, 2004, 2005, when it was just picking up across the Nordics, and obviously the big development center was in Estonia. And then I was able to see from the side how you can start in a tiny country like Estonia and build a world-class product that's used by hundreds of millions of people. So that gave me even more motivation to continue with that. So yeah, I was learning how to code during primary school and high school. And then I started looking into startups and then studying which one could I start. And then the first attempt didn't go too well. I tried to do an education startup in Estonia. And that I learned very quickly in about 6 months was a failure. Which I think was a very sort of, looking back, a good lesson, because I realized that people are really passionate about education, but nobody wants to spend a lot of money there. So I was going to schools and trying to sell them to use my software, which was quite ironical, because back then I was like a 16-year-old kid myself. So I'm going to the headmaster and trying to tell them to move all of their school system to my programs, which didn't go too far, and they didn't really have a lot of money to pay. So I unfortunately had to drop that. And then I was thinking, what's next? So everybody else was studying for exams and trying to figure out what they're going to do after high school. I didn't have that problem. I knew I'm going to be an entrepreneur, so I spent my last year just studying a lot of different fields. So, and then I stumbled on transportation. So I started to look into it more and more. I realized that this is fascinating. There's a lot of stuff going on, once in a generation opportunity. And I was like, what the hell? I'll start here and see where this goes.
All right. So you, and at this age, you were only, was it 18 or?
Yeah, exactly. So I started the business when I was 18, so very final 12th year of high school. And yeah, everybody else was studying for exams, so I had about 6 months of about free time. And then I started by doing everything you could to start the startup.
I must ask you one question before here. How can you be so clear about what to do? Because when I listen to you, you know that when you were a child, I want to be an entrepreneur. How do you put that? Is also one of the biggest things, big problem. You don't know what to do, but it feels like you were very sure about you know your goal. Did you have any? How can you be so?
I've been actually thinking about it for a lot, that where did the original clarity and motivation come from? What I understand is that it wasn't definitely something that I got from my parents directly, at least, because my parents grew up during the Soviet occupation of Estonia. So entrepreneurship was literally banned. So there was no entrepreneurs in the whole country. You just couldn't legally do it. Because of that, I mean, my mom was a teacher. My father was working for the public sector as well. So they weren't entrepreneurs at all by profession. But what they had actually was an entrepreneur's mentality. So I think that they were always thinking that everything in the world is possible. If you want to do something, you can make it happen. You should be really ambitious. You should work hard. You really have to care about other people. Don't only think about what's good for yourself, but try to create value for others. So I think they actually had a lot of the good principles of what entrepreneurs need, but just they couldn't do it because the country was occupied and it was impossible. So I think that when I was then growing up in the 90s, that's the mentality I was grown up with. And obviously when Estonia became free and independent and everybody could start to do companies, then it was obvious to me that that's what I want to do.
Wow, amazing. And now, like, Bolt is, you have over 150 million customers.
Indeed, we're one of the biggest technology companies from Europe.
And it comes from a small country, one of the smallest countries with 1.3 million people.
Absolutely. And if I look back, then I was born on this island of Saaremaa, not too far from Gotland. And I mean, that had a population of about 10,000 people. So I was growing up in a super tiny place, but that didn't stop me from having ambitions that I want to build one of the biggest companies on the planet.
Wow. And how is it to go to Estonia right now? Is it like you are a rock star? Can you go on the street and everybody like, yeah, Markus, you're like, or
I think Estonians are similar to Swedes in that sense that I think most people are quite sort of conservative and a bit introverted, and we're sort of not going on the streets and taking sort of too much photos if we see celebrities. But on the other hand, I think when Estonians have a few drinks and it's a Friday evening, then everybody becomes very open, and then oftentimes there's a queue.
But they must be, and you must be, and your parents must be so proud of you.
Absolutely. I think that my parents have been super supportive from day one, and that's something that's a fascinating part of the founding story as well. So when I was starting the business, I obviously didn't have any money as I was in high school. But we had to find at least a couple of €1,000 for me to help to find a programmer to join the team who could actually help me build the first version of the software. And then it took a lot of time for us to find somebody. And then the freelancer said that he's able to do it for about €5,000 at the time. And I didn't have that money, so I went to my parents. I was like, hey, can you lend me $5,000 to start the startup? And it was a funny conversation because they were like, hey, we put aside this money for your university studies. So if you're going to be taking this money and blowing it all on this startup, that's your choice. But then we can't give you anything more. So then you got to cover your own rent for the next few years. So I remember I was thinking about it for a couple of seconds, and I was, fuck it. I'll take the money and start to build the thing. And my parents were super supportive. They're like, okay, if that's what you want to do, we're fine. We're here to back you. But that's the limit of what we can do.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And you called the programmer and said that, yeah, now I have $5,000 and it's my mother's and father's money. So dude is good.
Well, pretty much. I mean, the engineer obviously saw that I was coming from a very humble background. I mean, I was sort of a passionate guy and I was eager to learn, but he saw that I didn't have any experience, I didn't have any network, didn't have any money. But I think he saw something in the idea, and that's why he joined and helped me build the first version.
And is he one of the founders? One of the
So then actually we had really interesting founding story in that regard, because effectively I started the company full-time myself, and then my brother Martin, who I was mentioning earlier, who was working at Skype earlier, he was an advisor at the start and then helped me connect with engineers and helped me find some first money. But he couldn't actually join the company immediately because he had a family and 2 kids, and he couldn't afford to drop everything and join the startup immediately. But then I was searching, where do I find a full-time engineer to join? We had this freelancer I mentioned. He helped me build the first version, but he couldn't also join full-time. So we're like, okay, we really need to find somebody, because otherwise we're just not going to get this thing off the ground fast enough. And the problem was I also had to go to university because, I was finishing high school. I had to go and start studying computer science. So I was like, okay, how do I juggle this? I got to be studying. I got to be starting the startup. We need somebody to help on the team. And so what we did, we started posting everywhere. So random forums for engineers. We went there, started posting that we're searching for a person to join.
So many people that are disappointed right now.
Yeah, looking back, I think many of them wish they had responded. But the funny thing was, nobody did. So we waited for many weeks. There was 0 applicants, 0 responses. And then one day in September 2013, I get an anonymous email. So somebody says, yeah, I'm potentially interested. Can we meet up? And so we meet at this random cafe in Estonia. I tell him excitedly about the idea and what we want to build and some of the early traction we had been seeing over the first weeks. And then the funny thing is that with the software engineers, oftentimes they're sort of very conservative and they don't really let you know what they're, whether they're excited or not. And I can tell you that it's even worse with Estonian software engineers. I mean, like you basically have no idea whether the guy's excited or not. He was just completely passive on the meeting. But then, we part ways, and I'm like, okay, that didn't go anywhere. But then a couple of days later, the same guy emails me again. And he's like, yeah, let's meet up. I want to hear more. And well, I didn't have any other applicants anyway. So I was like, sure, let's meet. And then we meet again in the same cafe. And then the craziest thing happens. So he comes there with 2 phones. He pulls out one phone, pulls out another phone, and it's like, here's the customer app, here's the driver app. He makes an order on the spot and shows the whole system works. And I'm like, wow. What the hell? And turns out the guy was so excited by the first meeting that he just went home and coded for like 48 hours straight and then built the first prototype. And it was crazy. So I said on the spot, you're hired. And then my next line was that I don't have any money to pay you. But I'm going to give you a good piece of equity in the company. And then he joined. And literally, that's how we got our third co-founder. It's completely crazy. We had never met the guy before.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Wow. And what is the story after this? What is the step after this?
So when Oliver, the third co-founder, joined, he started writing all the software. And then I was going on the streets of Tallinn, signing up taxi drivers one by one, trying to meet taxi companies, get them interested in the software. And actually, the first couple of months went really well. So we actually
Can we stop here?
Sure.
You were going around and signed up, what I heard, 50... you were signing up 50 taxi drivers by yourself in Estonian street, the street of Estonia.
Exactly. So I was going on the streets.
It was like you were 19 years old. You were going around and had this app who they build, a random guy built for 2 days, 2-3 days, and you was going around and talk to taxi drivers.
Exactly. So yeah, I opened the door in the taxi stop. I get in, I'm like, hey, you have 5 minutes. Do you want to hear about this idea? I'm here to help you make more money. And back in the day, most of the taxi drivers in Estonia were Russian speaking. So they barely spoke any Estonian. So oftentimes they just told me to get out of the car. I'm not going to waste any time on this teenager. Your app doesn't even work. And it was really tough. But after a couple of months, I think we had about 50 of those guys signed up. And then we were like, hey, we can actually launch this service for the customers properly.
All right. Okay. And did it work?
So actually, the early traction was really, really great. We managed to get a lot of attention from media because we were just something that was completely new and different in the market. All the taxi companies had really horrible service. It took a lot of time for the cars to show up. The cars were really dirty. You couldn't pay with a card. It was all paid in cash and so on. So it was just a really, really bad experience. And then what we promised was something completely new and novel. So you could order from the application. You had transparency. You had ratings. You had much better prices. They were transparent. Over time, we added digital payments as well, obviously. So it was just such a nice experience. So we got a lot of attention from customers from day one. But obviously it was really, really hard work to get the drivers on board because many of them didn't want to change. They had been doing their job for 50 years like that. They didn't want to adopt any new technology. So it was really a struggle.
And what was one of the biggest problem that was in the beginning?
I'd say
the first biggest problem.
I'd say the hardest thing was actually trying to do everything at once with just 2 people. So I was coding the app in the nights, trying to help, obviously designing the app and being the product manager, figuring out what we need to do. And then during the daytime, I was going and signing up the taxi drivers one by one. And then obviously trying to do all the marketing to get customers to actually join the service and everything we could there in terms of media and public relations. So as for any startup, the early days are a mess. It's super hard. But looking back, it was very fun as well. So I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Okay, and when did you sleep?
I must say I didn't really sleep too much in the first couple of months. I think that otherwise the company would have really never taken off the ground.
And what did your friends say to you when you were like you were going around and like catch taxi drivers in the streets, and then you were sitting up and then you had kind of up? What did your friends say to you?
Actually, I'd say that when they engaged with me, they were, mildly positive or neutral. They didn't say much. They were like, yeah, okay, you're working on something, that's fine. But what I actually heard years later was that in the background, they were all very skeptical. They were like, hey, what is this guy trying to do? Nobody's going to be using this app and whatnot. But at least, when they engaged with me, they were like, okay, let's see what comes out of it. And obviously now, 10 years later, I think they're all quite happy that things worked out as they did.
And what was the next step in this in the beginning? Were you like raising money, or
yeah? So
what was the next step?
So the first 6 months was just making sure that we got one city to work. So I was really focused on that, to make sure that we prove it in Tallinn, in Estonia, that it works. And then once we've done that, then we can raise some funding and start to expand. And how we got it working in Tallinn was a mix of different things. So on one hand, we went to individual taxi drivers. We were signing them up, as I was saying. And on the other hand, we went to taxi companies. So we went to them and we understood that they're actually running on horrible software, horrible systems. They were still using old school radios that were blaring, and then they had like paper notebooks and so on. So it was really bad. And then we convinced them that we actually have this great modern software and you should move to that. And it's going to be so much nicer for you to operate the company that way. And then we managed to get the first couple of customers on that as well. And then it took us, about 6 months to get it going nicely in Tallinn. We had tens of thousands of customers. And then we figured it was the right time to raise some additional money. And then we were able to raise about 1.1 million euros at the time from mainly local investors from Estonia and from the Baltics. And then we thought, hey, the world is open for us. We've proven it in one place. Now is the time to expand. And we tried to launch 7 countries at the same time. And it was super stupid.
At this time, you raised around 2 million euro, a little bit less. But how big was Uber at this time?
So back actually in 2013-14, they were very small. So they had mainly a big limousine business in the US with very fancy luxury cars, but they basically had no presence in Europe. I think they had launched 1 or 2 cities. And we didn't really think of them as a competitor because they were operating in this sort of luxury and premium segment. But we wanted to build something that millions of people could use, that would be more like a mass market great service. And we had completely different approaches, and we thought that we're not going to be even competing with them at all. So back then, that was not a concern to investors. They thought that there's plenty of room in this industry for a lot of different players. And then, yeah.
But I heard that they had raised 1.2 billion at the time that you raised 2 million. So they have a valuation.
Yeah, yeah. So that happened exactly like a year or 2 after that. So we raised the first 1 million. Then we started to expand. And then about 6 months after that, Uber raised these huge rounds of funding. And that's when things got very difficult for us because no investors wanted to back the company because they thought that they raised so much funding and they're going to completely dominate the sector and there's no chance for smaller entrants like us.
Mm-hmm. And how was that? And if we jump into that, you said that you tried to launch in 7 countries at the same time.
Yeah, it was so stupid. So we thought that we had worked out how to operate this business because we had Estonia working nicely. And we thought, how hard can it be? Let's hire 7 people and try to replicate this in all of those markets in parallel. And it actually turned out that it's not the case at all. So each of the markets was really different. We tried to do Finland, actually Sweden. We tried to launch Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Belarus, Serbia, a lot of different places. And we almost ended bankrupting the company because we burned through this 1.1 million in about 6 months. So basically all this funding was gone and we pretty much had nothing to show for it. None of those new markets actually worked. And then we were in a lot of trouble. So we figured that we need to raise new funding to change the strategy. So let's try to take one market at a time rather than try to do all of them at the same time. And then I met dozens and dozens of investors across Europe, in Sweden, in London, in Germany, and so on. And nobody wanted to invest in the business for 2 reasons. Well, first of all, our expansion had failed. So they saw we just burned the money and we didn't get anything for it. And 2, Uber raised a lot of money, as we just discussed. They raised more funding than almost any startup in history. So all these VCs were super afraid. They were like, hey, you seem like a great guy, but this sector is done. We're not going to be backing this company. Come back with your next idea. And then I was left with no other choice. We had to raise money from somewhere. So I was going around Estonia and going to very traditional entrepreneurs who had never invested in technology. And then we managed to convince them to invest 200K from one investor who was operating a railway in Estonia. Then we raised 300,000 from a construction, like a building developer in Estonia. So like completely random investors who had never invested in technology. But that was what kept the company afloat. So we managed to buy ourselves another year. We restructured. We were like, hey, let's take it one country at a time. Let's do it very carefully. And that proved out to be the right strategy. It took us a lot of time to figure it out.
Wow, amazing. And this guy, they must be very happy right now. They're doing railways with gold now.
Yeah, I mean, those guys now ended up being one of the most successful angel investors in Europe. I mean, they've now made like 1,000x on their money.
Yeah, it's amazing. Wow. What was the next country that you launched when you get your own fresh railways money?
So we then actually realized that we shut down all those 7 countries. Pretty much we were like, hey, we're not going to be able to do that at the same time. So let's take it one by one. And then we first figured, let's go to Latvia. It's the neighboring country to Estonia, should be very similar. And then we spent the next 6 months just being there pretty much every week on the ground, again, signing up companies, drivers one by one. And after 6 months, we got it to a level where it was working. And they were like, okay, we're starting to figure this out. So then we took the next country, that was Lithuania. We were like, okay, let's go there and figure it out, how that's going to go. So it sort of, we very methodically started to go one by one into these countries. And then the next after that was the Czech Republic and so on. And then there's a funny story that actually changed the company's product strategy a lot, which was Serbia. So we actually went there. We similarly tried to get that country going. Visited it many times. We met all the local taxi companies, and everybody was super hesitant and didn't want to join the platform. And we didn't really understand what's going on because we had already proven to so many companies that what we have is great, but in Serbia nobody wanted to sign up. And then we actually then went to meet the biggest company in the city. They reportedly had thousands of cars and were supposed to be a big proper company. And it's one of the most bizarre experiences in my life. So we show up there with our local salesperson. We go to this address that they had given us, and it's literally like middle of nowhere, some random residential apartment building. And we're like, how can this be a big proper company? And then we walk in, and it's an old Soviet times apartment. And then there's some grandma in the kitchen who's cooking some food. Then there's some like guys sitting there who are obviously bodyguards, some like big, huge, muscular guys. And then we ask like, yeah, what's going on? Is this the right place? They're like, yeah, the boss is sitting in the back. And then then we go to the room, and it's completely crazy. There's some huge guy who looks like Fidel Castro there, popping a cigar behind this huge wooden table. There's a safe in the corner, like a huge one, and then there's a pistol on the table. And
a pistol
yeah.
on the table.
And I'm like, wow, okay, this is some interesting meeting I walked into. But what do you do, right? I mean, if you're there, I was 20 years old. I was like, well, let's try to have the sales meeting, see what happens. And then we were telling him about how great our software is and the functionality and everything. And, he was just puffing his cigar. He didn't care. And then at the end of the meeting, he just says, guys, you're not going to be operating in Serbia. And turns out he was like the local mafia leader. So all the taxi companies did what he said. And since that day, I've never been back to Serbia, and Bolt is still not today operating there, which I think is a great story that just shows how messed up this sector is. You have these really crazy guys, very sort of dark industry, and it's been like that for decades. And then that's exactly what we were trying to change.
Mm. And what was your feeling when you saw the pistol?
Well, actually, I think on one hand, I was obviously quite alarmed, and I was like, we should take off as quickly as we can. But looking back, I think it also gives me a lot of motivation, because it makes it very clear what are we trying to change. I don't think that the taxi sector should be working like that. I mean, it's completely crazy that you still have these old school, literally mafia people who are running the sector. And I think that what you can do is actually create transparency. through technology. And that's exactly what we're trying to fix.
Is it some other countries that was very special, or I know that you're very big in Africa too?
Yeah. So actually, that's also quite interesting. So we, as I was describing, we started off in the Baltics, and then we expanded across Central and Eastern Europe, and then we gradually got into the Nordics as well. But then at some point we realized that actually there's so many other markets around the world outside of Europe, and then we should be exploring those as well. So we actually did it very simply. We had little budget. So we just made a basic table in Google Sheets, and we put there the top 300 cities in the world. And we rank them by a lot of different criteria, like GDP per capita, what's the regulation on the taxi market, how many drivers there are, how many people actually have cars in the city, and so on. And then we ranked them by all of that. And what we saw was that actually the African cities were top of the list. So they had a lot of people, but almost nobody has cars. There's almost no good public transport available, and there was very little competition. So we figured that actually this is a great opportunity for us. We can go and then build a much needed transportation system. And the problem was we didn't really have enough money to even go there. So we figured that what if we just hire somebody remotely? And that was back in 2016, where that seemed like a crazy thing and nobody had done it. So we put up job ads. We hired people over some Skype video calls. We got the young student. We sent him some money. We're like, hey, find yourself an office, start training drivers, and let's see what happens. And the traction we got there was just unbelievable. So we had thousands of drivers signing up. We had tens of thousands of customers signing up. And then like a year in, suddenly South Africa was our single biggest market. It far exceeded anything we had been able to achieve in Europe by that time. And that really opened our eyes. That actually there's an opportunity in Europe, but there might be an even bigger opportunity in some of these emerging markets that really need transportation.
That's amazing. So cool story.
Yeah, looking back, it's quite crazy that we got there without us ever even being there on the ground for many years.
That's crazy. It's crazy. Wow. Was it some other countries that were really hard to, or was it someone that was some country that was easier, or some other one that was harder, or do you have a cool story from another thing?
Well, we now operate in 52 countries. So most countries in Europe, all the bigger countries in Africa, and then many outside. And I think there's always some interesting learnings from all of them. But I think actually probably the most difficult one for us so far has been the UK, and specifically London. And there was a crazy story for us as well, because we had done really well across Central Eastern Europe and Nordics. Then we did really well across Africa. And then we managed to raise our first serious round of funding. So we raised more than 175 million euros from Daimler, owner of Mercedes-Benz. And then we had sufficient funding. We thought that now is a good time to start to launch in Western Europe as well. So let's go into the traditional larger economies. And we first picked London, and we thought that, well, we've already launched 10 countries. How hard can this be? And that turned out to be a complete surprise for us. So what we did was that we applied to get a license from TfL, the Transport Authority. It took us a couple of months, and we didn't really get any reply. And we thought, okay, this is going too slow for a startup. We need to move faster. So what can we do? And then we found a local taxi company that had a license, and we thought that, well, let's go and buy this company, and then we get the license that way. It's going to be much faster than applying for a license ourselves. And then we did it. We bought the company. We set up all the PR and all the launch material, signed up thousands of drivers. And then we announced we're going to be launching. It was early September. And then in 48 hours, we got a letter from TfL, the Transport Authority, that we need to shut down. They were like, hey, you've bypassed the process. You didn't get the license as you originally thought. This is unacceptable. You guys need to shut down. And we were like, we can't do that. We've already invested millions of euros into all this launch and getting everything going. So this is crazy. But obviously we had to comply and actually shut down the entire service. We're like, sorry customers, sorry drivers, we can't actually continue like this. And it was absolutely horrible. And I think that was a huge lesson for the company, that countries are very different. Some countries have really tough regulation, and you really got to respect that and take it seriously. And since then, now over the last 6 years, we invested so much into safety, compliance, public policy, legal, and so on. And it's really shown that, I mean, today we're actually the safest operator in London, and the London Transport Authority is giving us, we have great relations. They give us very long licenses to operate in the market. But it took us a lot of time, a lot of resource to change the sort of culture of moving fast in the company, that yes, you got to move fast, but you also got to do it properly.
Mm-hmm. I understand. Can you also tell me about, you raised a lot of money in London and elsewhere, early days from some other. Can you tell me a little bit about this raising money? What has been your learnings to meet a lot of investors?
Sure. Actually, I'd say that the journey for us has been very tough, because again, the first 3-4 years, nobody wanted to fund the business. They saw that they liked the team, they liked the numbers we had, we were growing fast, but they were so afraid that this sector is just going to have one winner and there was no room for anybody else.
How many meetings did you have at that time? How many no?
I think that
roughly said.
Roughly, I think it's between probably 70 and 100. It was a lot of meetings. And we met pretty much all the VCs you can find in Europe at the time. We tried to get everybody excited and everybody turned us down. And what that forced us to do, actually looking back, was a great thing, because we didn't have any money. So we were forced to be really frugal. We had to be really creative with the money, get a lot of efficiency out of every euro that we spent. And that, I think, made the culture of the company really great. I think it made us very resilient, tolerate stress, be really creative. And then once we were able to raise money from Daimler, then 175 million, obviously we could use that money so much more efficiently than any of the competitors, because we had been through 5 really, really tough years.
So that is, so what, if you we talk to the young entrepreneurs who are listening on this right now and give them some advice to raise money, what would that be?
I'd say that, first of all, you can't give up, regardless of how many no's you get, because as in our example, the first 5 years, we were pretty much unable to raise any money from traditional VCs. We tried for many, many years, and none of the big brand names that people know were willing to invest. But we didn't give up because of that. And we were like, hey, we believe in the idea. We think this company is going to be really great long term. So if we need to raise money from a local real estate developer, that's fine. I mean, we're going to take the money we can get. We're going to be building the company. And one day we're going to be so big and successful that these VCs cannot ignore us. And then we're going to go and raise money from them as well. And that's exactly what happened. So it took us many, many years of grinding to build the company. But then in 2021, one day I get a call from Sequoia. They're like, hey, we want to invest hundreds of millions in the company. And it pretty much proved everything we hoped for, that if you build a really great company, then the best investors in the world are going to come to you.
Amazing story, amazing story. And if we talk a little bit about leadership, what's your approach to leadership and company culture at Bolt? How do you ensure that the company's values are upheld across all its offices globally?
Well, it all starts off with how do you hire? And we've been really focused on that from really the start of the company, because the first year for me was a big lesson. So during this time, as when we raised the first funding and we started to expand, I was a first-time manager. I was literally out of school, 19 years old. I had no idea who to hire and how to manage people. And out of the first 10 people we hired, we had to fire 7 of them. So it was horrible. And I think there's a saying in startups that the first 10 people really define the company. Well, if you had applied that to us, I mean, you'd say that the Bolt is not going to go very far. But actually what happened was that out of those 10 people, 3 of them actually were really, really great. And 2 of them are still with the company today, 10 years later. So I think that the lesson I took from that was that you really got to focus on the right attributes. And the formula that has worked for me is that I really look for 3 things in people. I look for drive, for intelligence, and for integrity. And what I mean by that is that, I mean, by drive, I look for people who are really hardworking, motivated, positive, because I found that it's hard to change that in people. Some people already are just sort of built like that. They're really engaged. They really want to compete. They want to build stuff. And that's the kind of people who want to attract to Bolt. And I found it's very, very hard to create that in people. If you take somebody who's not that energetic and not that positive and excited, it's very hard to later change that once they join. So that's really key. And second, on intelligence, what we mean by that is people who are able to learn. Because judging from my own experience, I started as a kid. I had no idea about how to build a company. But I realized that if you want to, you can learn really, really fast. And that's exactly the kind of people who have been able to attract to Bolt, who joined the company in one field, and they are actually able to learn quickly and progress through the company and then make a great career. So again, that's really key. And then third is once you have these people who are hardworking, smart, then what you also need is them to be team players. You need them to be ethical, trustworthy, and that's what we mean by high integrity. So really try to index on those three things when we look for people. And the other part is then, let's say you have them in the company now, then how do you manage them? And what I've seen always is that it doesn't really matter what are the values that you write somewhere or you put them on the wall. What matters is who do you actually promote in the company and who do you fire in the company. And if the people who are following the principles get promoted, they get salary increases and so on. I mean, other people in the company will see that gets rewarded and they want to follow that. And vice versa. I mean, if you see that somebody is completely going against the values, not actually putting customers first, doing something that's very just self-interest driven, and you don't take any action, then you enable that to become the new standard and people will start to abuse it and do that as well. So you really got to be strict with that and make sure that you attract and you keep the people who follow the values and you don't do it with the people who have a different mentality.
Mm-hmm. If you would have an interview with some people that you want to hire at Bolt, what is the question that you will ask them and what do you look for?
Well, how I've tried to assess these things is has really changed over time. But the one thing that's always remained constant is that I deeply try to understand the motivation of the person and really understand what gets them going. Because some people are very motivated by just money. Others are motivated by social status. They really care about what's their title in the company and so on. There might be people who are very motivated by impact. So what they really care about is that they're positively changing the world. Fourth group might be that there's people who just want to learn. So they're really curious about solving some very hard technical problems and learning that way. So you really got to understand why is the person actually here? Why are they in the interview? What do they want to actually achieve? What is Bolt going to be offering them? And you got to attract the people who join for the right reasons. Because if you attract people who just join for the money, they're probably not going to be with us for the long term. And they're probably not going to make the best decisions.
Like your company now is worth a lot of money, and it's also, I read that it's maybe next year will be an IPO, and but how was it for you? Because you want to be entrepreneur, but and I thought that you want to be entrepreneur because you want to change the world, you want to do something good, and when you get old, you want to look back that you have given something, you have changed something. But also, the most entrepreneurs also want to have, good salary, good money. Is money something that have driven you?
Not really, because if I wanted to make good money and go on a vacation, I could have done that when I was about 23 years old. We got the first offer to buy the company for about $100 million. I would have made enough money to live on an island comfortably for my entire life. But when I was thinking about it, I mean, it wasn't even an option for me because that's not what I wanted to do. I was like, hey, I'm just at the start of my life. What I knew since I was a kid is that I want to apply technology to make the world a better place. And if I sold the company, I'd go for a vacation for a week and then probably come back and start my next company. So what's the point of doing that? I might as well continue with the company I already have and which I like a lot. So that was when I was very clear to all the shareholders, to the team, that, hey, we're in it for the long term. We're going to build one of the biggest, most exciting companies from Europe that's ever been here. And I'm going to be here for a long time. So no money has never really been a big motivator for me.
And what is the next step? And what is your goal right now?
So if we think about what we've already achieved over the last 10 years, on one hand, it's amazing. We have 150 million customers, 52 countries, team of more than 4,000 people. But when I think about where we are heading, it's just the start. What I always tell the team is that we're about 1% done. And how I think about it is that I think there's a once in a generation shift where especially young people, they don't want to own private cars anymore. They want to use mobility on demand, whether that's scooters or bikes or taxis or car rentals or delivery products and so on. They necessarily don't want to own the asset anymore. And it's one of the biggest opportunities on the planet. So just in Europe alone, people spend more than 1 trillion euros a year on their private cars. It's one of the biggest sectors. So what we are aiming to do is how do we make it easier for people that they don't need to use a car anymore. They can actually switch to Bolt and use mobility on demand whenever they want to. It's flexible, it's more convenient. They don't have to deal with the parking tariffs and everything. And we think that it's a huge shift that's going to happen over the next 20 years. So realistically, we're only getting started. I think there's room for us to grow not 10 times, but potentially 100 times from where we are at the moment. And that's super exciting for me. So I really think we're just getting started.
What are your thoughts about self-driving cars?
Once they eventually get here, they're going to change the world. But unfortunately, I'm quite worried it's going to be many, many years before they get here. And even though Elon Musk, I think, is great at marketing and he's been talking about robot taxis for a long time, reality is that they're not going to be here anytime soon. When we look at all the leading players in this sector, they're able to do some impressive demos. They might have one city or a few cities where they show you a solution that seems to work, but it's very far from being commercially viable. Unfortunately, the prices today just to run the service are so high that it's not something that's going to be replacing humans anytime soon.
And what is soon? Is it like 5 years, 10 years? If you talk about big cities in Europe, we can say Berlin, UK,
well,
like Stockholm.
I think there's been a saying that self-driving cars are 10 years away for the last 30 years already. So I think that it's always 10 years away. And that's what I think is unfortunately the reality today as well. So even if the technology is ready, unfortunately it's going to take a lot of time before the costs come down. And then the regulation also needs to open up. And that's going to be a long time.
Okay. And what are your thoughts about AI? Do you see it as a big problem for the humanity, or do you see it as something that will help us?
I think that in general, technology is a positive thing, and it's really the thing that moves society forwards. And AI is just the latest evolution of that. I think that absolutely it makes sense for us to keep on investing and making society more productive and automating the really easy tasks that I think humans shouldn't be doing. And I think people can be working on a lot more interesting and more creative areas. And that's great. On the other hand, obviously, we gotta be careful that any technology can also be used for a bad thing. So similarly, if you think about nuclear power, it can be used as a great thing to generate power. It also can be used as a weapon. And similarly with AI, I think we need to use it very carefully.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We can jump into the next question that I have. What has been one of the most rewarding moments in your entrepreneurial journey so far?
I have two different answers here. I think first of all, if you imagine sitting in a very hot sauna for a very long time and then you jump in cold water and it feels great afterwards, I think that's what oftentimes these funding rounds feel for founders as well. So, you're starting to run out of money and then, the tension keeps on going up and you're waiting for months and months whether you're going to be able to get the money and then save the company. And then eventually the moment where you sign the papers with investors and you get the round done, it really feels like a round of, fresh air. and you feel so much relief. And I think that's absolutely how it was for us many times. The company was in a really difficult place, and we always managed to save the company by raising money at the right moment. And looking back, I'd never want to be in that position again. And luckily now the company the last 3 years is doing super well, and we are not at risk, but the first years were really brutal. But I think actually aside from those very specific instances where you close around, actually what I think is actually the most enjoyable is just sort of the daily journey. So if you come to the office, you have fantastic colleagues, super smart, really dedicated, you get to work on cool problems. It doesn't feel like that in the moment that it's so great, but actually if you look back and then you see what you've been able to achieve with the team, that's really what gives me the most joy actually. Looking back at the last 10 years, what we've been able to achieve.
Do you have any, because you work very hard and this amazing from zero to this enormous company and only 10 years, and you started when you were 18, 19 and now you're 29. You must be very strict, disciplined. And do you have any routines, morning routines, evening routines, or do you have something like, I must do this to have this high pace?
Absolutely. And if I look at the last 10 years, it's changed a lot. So as I was saying, there's been some moments like the first couple of months where you have to sprint and you work 100 hours a week to get everything done. Whether it was we had some fundraise going on, or we had to launch a new country or something like that, where we had to travel a lot. There were some very intense periods. And obviously that's not sustainable forever. So what I now try to have is a more balanced schedule, which I see is something that I can manage for the next 10 years as well and still continue being productive and actually adding value to the company. And on that, my routine is actually quite simple. My father used to be a pretty professional athlete back in the 70s in Estonia, and I always grew up with the mindset that every morning you gotta be doing 10-15 minutes of exercise and stretching and so on, and that's something I've been doing for the last 30 years, pretty much every day. And similarly, I think that I've always prioritized sleep. So every time I meet some students or some entrepreneurs who say they do an all-nighter and they don't sleep well, I never do that. I always take sleep very seriously, and that enables me to be a lot more productive. And third, I'm very skeptical about having some dopamine apps on my phone. So I don't have any social media on my phone. I don't have Slack on my phone. So when I work, I take the laptop. I'm intensely focused. I do an intense 8 or 10 hours a day. But what I try to avoid is that you get home in the evening and then you try to do some quick messages on the phone. It's oftentimes just a distraction and a waste of time.
Do you have mail on your phone?
Mail I do, but I check it maybe once a day. So I'm normally, again, I sit down in the office, I take a proper day of work, and then when I'm out of the office, I try not to meddle with some emails. I might go for a walk and have a sort of long strategic thinking about the subject, but I try to avoid this like random popping up emails and Slack messages.
Yeah, it's very easy. It's very easy that you jump in, because I take away Instagram and TikTok and everything, so I don't have that at all. But it's very easy if you have, and I also have a lot of emails, different kind of emails, so you can jump in and it feels like it's a circle. You do this and then you jump into that. We can say, like, if you have Instagram, jump into Instagram, look there, and then you jump to email, and then you jump to Facebook, and then you jump to look at TikTok, and then you maybe WhatsApp, and then you go back again.
Yeah,
Instagram,
and you can be
WhatsApp,
stuck in that loop for the whole day.
And the whole life.
Yeah. So exactly, that's what I try to really avoid. So yeah.
What do you have? Do you have WhatsApp?
WhatsApp I do, but I really use it very rarely. I maybe check it again once a day, see if there's any important messages.
How can you only like check it once a day? Because and I know that you have a lot to do and you have a lot of people. You maybe get like, I don't know, 20, 50 new messages. How can you only go into it once a day? Is it like you are so disciplined that I will not check it because it's also dopamine?
Exactly. No, I think it's mainly coming from discipline, where I've told people as well, if you really need me to urgently make a decision, then call me on the phone. I'm always a phone call away. But again, I'm not just going to be checking random messages 8 o'clock in the evening because, again, if it's truly an important decision, then you should be able to plan it in advance and book a meeting in my calendar. Not that you come to me at the last moment and you tell me I need to decide anything. Then something is off with the planning.
Mm-hmm. Interesting mentality.
Well, so far it helps keep me sane. Otherwise, if I would be responding to everything 24/7, don't think I would have enough time to actually think strategically and deeply about what we need to do and remain healthy. Because if you're already being intense in the office 8 or 10 hours a day, then you also got to have some time to relax in the evenings. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to keep it up for a very long time.
Yeah, it's very easy to get stressed also.
Exactly.
Do you do like cold bath or sauna, or do you doing something else that you feel like take away some stress?
Yeah, mix of all of those actually. So I'm a big fan of having a healthy lifestyle, trying to exercise 4 or 5 times a week. Normally, the more stress I have, the more I try to exercise. It helps me a lot. But also, sauna, cold plunges, all the basics, they work really well.
Can you tell me a little bit about some interesting people you have met in the world?
Oh, I've been lucky to meet some fantastic people over these years.
Have you met Elon Musk?
Elon I haven't actually met, but I think equally interestingly, 5 years ago, I got an invite to attend a dinner at Bill Gates' home. And that was pretty fantastic. So
Wow.
he's hosting a small event a few times a year, invites various people from all around the world. It was a super nice dinner at his place. There were some crazy people there, like Reed Hastings, CEO of Netflix. Warren Buffett was there. So
Wow.
some really, really interesting folks. And I was maybe 24, 25 at the time. That was really eye-opening to meet some of those heroes in person and actually see that they're all human beings. Yes, I mean, they're very talented, very hardworking, but I didn't at all get the impression that I also couldn't get to that level in 30 years if I work hard.
Really cool. I'm going to jump into the last questions. If you want to give some advice to the 20s that listen to this, what would you say to the 20s?
I'd say work hard. I think in nowadays society that isn't valued highly enough. I think that there's oftentimes a mentality that people can get rich very quick by having some sort of scheme or getting lucky. But what I found from the best entrepreneurs is that it just takes time. And if you keep going at it day after day, then eventually you're going to be successful as well. So don't give up.
And do you have a documentary or a book or something that you recommend that you have learned a lot from?
There's many. I'd say that as a manager, one I really recommend to everybody, and I buy for all the managers in Bolt, is High Output Management. It's a fantastic book about how to lead people and be very effective. And otherwise, I recommend all the standard entrepreneurship books, all the biographies. I've read most of them. So whether it's Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or about Amazon, there's some fantastic books and you got to learn from the best. There's always some great lessons you can take about how those guys built up their companies.
What is do you have a role model? Do you have something that you look up to or impressed of?
I don't have any single individual I'm a big fan of. I think that, again, all of them have their pros, but they also have their cons. And I try to learn from the best elements and combine them. So, for example, from Elon Musk, I think he's great at marketing. He's able to convey this really big and ambitious vision and get people excited. And that's fantastic. From other people like Steve Jobs, I mean, obviously fantastic at design and having a very high quality bar. Or from Jeff Bezos from Amazon. I mean, you can see how sort of an efficient organization he's built up that's operating at a massive scale, and they're very frugal and cost efficient as well. So again, I think we've been trying to take the best elements from each of those entrepreneurs and then combine them.
And what is the next step for you? And I was like looking like, what is the next thing for you? You will like build up Bolt, and you say that Bolt is maybe 1% what it can be, but what is do you have any other things that you have thought about that you want to go into or invest in, or some area that you think is very interesting?
I actually spent 90+% of my time focused on Bolt because I still think there's so much to do, and we actually keep on launching new products within Bolt as well because the transportation space is very large. But if I had to do something else, then in the last couple of years, I'm really interested in the defense sector. So specifically there, I think that the times have changed over the last couple of years. And I think democracies, especially in Europe, need to invest more in defense. So I think that's going to be a very exciting space.
And what are your thoughts? Because also Estonia is pretty close to Russia. What are your thoughts? That is pretty scary.
Absolutely. I mean, 30 years ago, we were occupied by Russia, as I was saying. I mean, my parents grew up in that regime. It was horrible. And nobody wants to go back there. So I think that especially the Baltic states have personally lived through this. We know how tough it can be. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're the first ones to raise the alarm and say that, hey, we need to be investing in defense. Otherwise, this history might repeat itself. And I think that there are some people who are a bit naive and then think that wars are not going to be happening anymore. Well, I think that the attack on Ukraine, I think, proved to everybody that wars are not over. There's still going to be wars in the 21st century, and we got to be serious about it. So I don't think anybody likes it. I don't think anybody wants to be working necessarily in the defense sector, but I don't think we have an alternative. We just have to do it.
Mm. And can you tell me a little bit about Bold's future? What will happen in the coming years?
Actually, our roadmap for the next few years is very clear. The company now is in a very good independent state. We're well funded. We continue growing nicely, and we have a lot of room to grow with our existing products. Whether it's launching new countries across Europe or new countries across Africa, or it's launching new products that are very similar in terms of being in the mobility space, but open up new use cases like car rental services or payment services around it. We think there's a lot of room ahead to grow. So we have a clear roadmap, and we're just heads down executing on that for the next few years.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Markus, that you have joined us, and a pleasure to talk to you. And yeah, really interesting to hear about your story and what you and your team have done.
Absolutely. Thank you for the great questions.
Thank you.